Hello and welcome to Can We Have Your Attention, the podcast all about the attention economy and how it affects you, your life and your world. I'm James Wickham. This is Claire Coady.
Hello, James.
Hello. The founder of the Attention Practice, of course. And Claire, a small note before we start this episode. We were going to bring you a fascinating discussion we had a week or so ago now about the nature of attention itself and whether we need a movement to help revolutionise the way we think and interact with attention. We will bring you that episode in a fortnight, but we felt we couldn't ignore what happened over the weekend in Iran. So this week's episode is all about the Middle East and the conflict that has ensued following the joint US-Israeli strikes on Saturday. Now, we're recording this podcast from 2000 GMT on Monday, the 2nd of March, 2026. So you're aware of what information we know as we record. I suspect quite a lot may change shortly. And we're going to talk about not only what has happened in that region over the last few days, but also decisions taken in the US over the use of AI. But first, Claire, why don't you introduce our guest?
So we are joined this week by Andrew Cheatham, who is the Senior Security Analyst at Global Guardian. But that is among many other things. Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you for having me. So amongst other things, that is my day job these days. But I also am an adjunct professor at Boston University at their Washington, D.C. program, where I teach about disruptive technologies and democratic governance. So basically, it's how AI and other disruptive technologies are taking on everything in our society. I also am a senior research fellow at King's College London in their King's School of Applied Security Studies. So that's where I look primarily at how AI-enabled weapon systems are changing warfare and mainly looking at it from an international law perspective. I have a small little law practice here in Washington, D.C., where I do mostly pro bono law, and that's about it for now. Yes.
You're a busy man.
Yeah.
Sure.
I feel ashamed.
I'm a busy man. Yes. I'm just thinking about that today.
So shall we just start then very briefly with what you make of what's happened over the last 72 hours or so?
Sure. So every weekend for about a month at least, at Global Guardian and amongst the friends and colleagues, we've been expecting that maybe this will be the weekend. We always expected it might come on a weekend, that the U.S. might strike it around. Now, we weren't sure because I think the only person who really knew was Donald Trump himself is what we understood to be. But of course, there's an immense buildup of assets in the region. And so it was expected. So once things really sort of started, the question on many people's mind was, what is the goal here? Was it going to be regime change? Was it going to be to just obliterate more nuclear sites again or disable ballistic missiles? So people are looking for what sort of the overall strategy would be. Then secondly, what is Iran's retaliatory measures? What are they going to be? How far reaching? How narrow? So all of those questions, which in large part have been answered over this weekend. Now, professionally, I was helping my colleagues work to try to get many people who work in the region, especially in the Gulf, which is relatively stable, to move if they want to evacuate the area. And I've also helped some media journalists try to get into the area so they can report on what's going on. So there's lots of movement, lots of chaos. And of course, the politics has also been a big discussion.
Tell us a little bit more about that. How has it been in the U.S.? Because in the UK, it is covering, it's blanket coverage in the news, but most people seem to be a little bit detached from it.
Well, I do think that we in the U.S., over on Saturday with friends just who don't work in this space, it did seem almost bizarrely detached. People out and about in Washington, drinking, eating, not not much discussion, around. But certainly, people who follow this and work in foreign policy, it's top of mind. It does feel. I had a great occasion on last night to have a dinner with friends who worked with me in Libya. I worked in Libya for 4 years, and there's been a lot of parallels brought to this Iran situation. I think most commonly Iraq, but people also talk about Libya, any regime change situation. And so we were able to critique over the years, particularly from the view of Libya, what really the mistakes that we could be repeating are, and lots of frustration, lots of question. And I think it also goes along a broader trend of what we've seen in Venezuela, what we're allowing maybe in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where this sort of absolute break from the norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity are just pretty much out the window. You don't even hear much conversation about it at all. The emergency security, I'll just say, I had a talk, I was in the UN that's why I was in Libya. I was in the UN for 11 years in the field before working for the US government. And in UN circles, even amongst UN staff, the Emergency Security Council meeting that they had over the weekend was also seen as just sort of no consequence whatsoever. I mean, so
So hard to
there's a
imagine when
lot
you think
of
about
frustration.
Libya.
Yeah, yes. So I think these are the kind of, it's a continuation of a trend that I think has been going on. It predates this administration, in my view, but of course has been sort of supercharged with this administration, where the post, I mean, it's almost cliche at this point. The rules based order, the post 1945 order is gone. I think there's no doubt about that. It was said in Munich. It was said in Davos. It's known. And this is just the might makes right day. And we're just continuing with that.
Interesting. Do you think that's a little bit why people seem a bit more detached from it? If it is this narrative of might makes right, what say or what sway do people have in this?
I think we're so deeply cynical these days. We are so deep. I mean, now, of course, when I say we, I'm quite often talking from this view here in Washington, D.C. and
Yeah.
in the United States. I often come to the UK and to Europe to speak to people. And of course, the view is different. And of course, around the world and in Africa and Latin America, everybody has a different view. But so when I say we, I do mean we here in the United States have grown so deeply cynical when it comes to certain things like foreign affairs, like armed conflict. I mean, you get some feelings around Gaza that seem to percolate, a lot, and that was obviously a big part of what we look at in strategic communications and just the phenomenon of new media and how people were drawn to Gaza. But there was also this talk about punch the monkey recently, right? And how people really got on to punch the monkey in Japan and
Oh, of
not
course.
and let go of things. Yes, with the
Yeah.
doll. And there was, all this enthusiasm and sort of sympathy for Punch the Monkey, and not much at all for the wars. This is before Iran took over the media landscape.
Of course.
But I saw some critique of things still going on in Gaza. There's still suffering going on. There's still conflict, obviously, in Sudan. There was a conflict in South Sudan over the weekend that nobody paid attention to. Of course, Pakistan is fighting Afghanistan right now. So Iran takes a lot of attention, but when you talk about being detached, by and large, the American public on all sides of the political spectrum are very detached from the global stability, geopolitics, and what that means for them and the community of people, of humanity around the world. I don't think that's really of top concern for a lot of people. I've done a lot of surveys with my previous job, the United States Institute of Peace, and I did see that for many years here recently across the political spectrum, across different demographics all over the country, rich, poor, black, white, brown, all over the political spectrum, much more concerned about the problems at home and not really thinking that those things are linked to anything globally.
That's really interesting because part of it as well is I wonder whether, there is a sense that this doesn't matter to people as much, or to the American people as much, partially because there isn't as strong links between the administration and between media. So actually the flow of information from the administration to media, or, to the press, to tell the American people why they're going to war, why these actions have been taken, what the consequences might be, what the plans are, how the American military will be involved, with expectations regarding the American military beyond there will be casualties. That just doesn't seem to be as prominent as it's been in previous conflict. I'm not really sure whether that read is legitimate.
Well, I think that it cannot be, especially when I speak to friends, colleagues, loved ones in the UK. I think we cannot overstate how much the the norms that are just built-in assumptions to many of us are just completely out the window. So this idea that you would need to make the case to the American people, like they attempted to do in Iraq. I mean, they did do that in Iraq. I mean, for whatever you think about the right or wrong that war, it was not endorsed by the Security Council, but they took it to the Security Council. At least, see, I always say that you will miss hypocrisy, because nihilism is much worse, so, we've moved to the next phase. So at least lie to me. I mean, that's why they call Trump, a bullshitter, not a liar, because there's lying is you actually have some regard for the truth. But if you bullshit, you just don't give a shit. So I think this is a continuation of that understanding and the completely tossing out of all norms. I mean, yes, there's some political commentators I just heard before jumping on here about speaking about how the president did not give any of the traditional sort of addresses to his press conference in the way that other presidents have on the eve or after conducting such strikes, an armed conflict, and instead he went one by one to media outlets, of his choice, not a press conference. So it is strange. Even the announcement of this on Truth Social at 2 a.m. was also strange. It's definitely a product of our times and new media.
Well, it's such an interesting kind of new approach to things. And I wondered whether, I mean, you're talking about the media and the way that the media is interacting with this administration in the US. Do you get a sense at all from any conversations that you've had that there has been a change in the way that information has flowed within parts of the administration itself, even within the military? We've heard quite a lot in the past, haven't we, about things like, Donald Trump not wanting to be part of necessarily the Five Eyes stuff, or at least there being not as much sharing of intelligence information between different partners in that. Do you get a sense that that flow of information has changed as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. It is common to hear here in Washington the same refrain that you'll go to one meeting, with the State Department, another meeting with the National Security Council, another meeting in the DoD, Department of Defense, or if people want to call it the Department of War, I don't. Um, uh, then you will hear a different story across all of those briefings on whatever the issue may be. And I think that, it is the case that lots of foreign policy had been conducted from the White House and the National Security Council. There's been several successive presidents that have concentrated the most important foreign policy issues within the National Security Council and not the State Department. So that breakdown that sort of disconnect has been common. But in this White House, I think it was true in the first Trump term, and I think even more so now, that the way information is disseminated across agencies with the interagency mechanisms that they have to share information have broken down. And then that's not to mention just so many of the institutional memory through people who have been fired, who have left. That's also why some of these information flows have broken down, because of course some of it is just natural through between people and people, and a lot of that is broken down because you've had so much churn, especially in areas of national security.
That's really interesting. I had a follow-up question actually about the amount of information, how that would get processed, and do you see any changes between previous conflicts, the start of previous conflicts, and this one?
I mean, I think that as far as the ability to process massive amounts of data through signals intelligence has been increasing since 9/11. I mean, I think we've just been on this exponential increase in the ability for the intelligence community to gather information through SIGINT or open source intelligence. I mean, including open source intelligence, and then recently with AI, there's been an ability to process that information within the administration. I think, especially even in the last year. So it's not necessarily because of this administration, but because of the use cases that are now available for AI. we see an ability to process that information, aggregate it, and manipulate it for useful purposes more than ever before.
So their ability to actually derive not just good intelligence, but good decisions from that information has probably changed in the last year as well.
Informed, I don't know, good, but informed.
Informed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we go on to AI, I just wanted to ask you specifically about Iran itself, just from because I'm a layman, I don't have the kind of military background or anything, So, what are the challenges of getting really good information from places like Iran? We talked about, you very kindly answered my question about the Five Eyes and so on, but do we actually have a sense of how good the information is that they've been working to in this administration?
Well, I think that, just to your point, I think that these partnerships in Five Eyes, which the story there has been that there's been a little bit of a breakdown and a little bit of reluctance to share with this administration, and I know that is a strain as our sort of traditional partners in international security, let's say. Um, as those relationships certainly have changed. I think that's not the case with the U.S. and Israel. I think that the U.S. and Israel have a very, very strong partnership on information flows. I mean, I know some might criticize Israeli intelligence operations in the U.S. or some. There's rumors and things about that, but when it comes to operations in the Middle East, where we have a shared objective, I think that those synergies between what we bring to the table with very, very sophisticated tools and brilliant analysts, and what they bring to the table with a long tradition of being able to penetrate both with human intelligence and new technology, then we've seen some of the most, fascinating intelligence operations recently. I mean, especially with the Hezbollah pager operation, which was both an intel operation and obviously a kinetic operation that was highly successful from the Israeli perspective. And then we've seen the assassinations that have taken place all during the course of this sort of since October 7th, and what has progressed since then, which has of course included Iran. And we've seen Hamas leaders assassinated in Iran. Of course, what happened in Doha, Qatar. So the Israeli intelligence within the region is extremely strong, and I think we only serve to bolster it. Now, of course, some of our technology companies, Palantir namely, is certainly is a big provider of intelligence services, tech that lends itself to AI decision support systems and other systems for Israel, and also we work with them too. So there is that big pooling of resources there.
Yeah, and I think that's important to emphasize that going hand in hand with the ability to analyze that comes from the U.S., but the ability to gather the information from Israel, from Iran is important, because I heard someone today describe that Iran's main modus operandi isn't actually their sophistication; it's their unpredictability. It's their ability to cause chaos and make people feel insecure. And is that part of the challenge that we're seeing in the Gulf states at the moment, in particular, as Iran starts targeting assets there?
I think that was what really has taken some people by surprise in their response, is that they really are all over the place. Hitting places from, of course, right over the strait there in the UAE, but also as far away as Cyprus. Of course, they're attacking Israel, and some of those missiles are getting through into Tel Aviv and elsewhere. Of course, their proxies are working in Iraq to wreak havoc there on U.S. sites. We're just seeing it all over the place, and I think this is part of their strategy to just blanket the entire region with whatever is within their reach and wreak havoc, as you said. We did not see this, as far back as the first administration when Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani, who was, the head then of the IRGC and high, the supreme commander of the security forces in Iran, we saw more of a very tame sort of response to strike at U.S. base in Iraq, but it was choreographed. It didn't cause much damage, and sort of that was the end of it. We saw something similar, during this 12-day war. There was, yes, a response into Israel, but it was deflected by the Iron Dome, and these things were not very aggressive on the part of Iran, and I think they regularly thought that they could continue and just slog through with the status quo. They have definitely been weakened through their proxies have been weakened. Hezbollah, to the extent you want to consider Hamas one of their proxies, I would probably wouldn't. They're certainly supported by Iran, but I don't know if they're as aligned as Hezbollah, for example, or the Houthis with the Iranian project. And of course, there's the Iraqi militia, who are not all Shia militia, who are not all aligned to Iran. Some are distinct. It's quite complex, but they are there with some loyalties, considerable loyalties to Iran. Lots of those, maybe lesser so in Iraq, but certainly the Houthis have been diminished. Hezbollah has been diminished, and this ability to reach in with these proxies has suffered. And then, of course, they have been degraded with their missile programs. Certainly, the nuclear program has been set back. We don't know exactly how far. So they're weakened for sure, and I don't know if that's more scary because as it becomes an existential situation, which of course it is now. I mean, I started with, we didn't know the purpose, but the purpose is clear: regime change, whether they back off of that or not. But the more they feel this is existential and they have nothing to lose, probably the more soft targets we'll see them striking at, and the more desperate and more havoc will be wreaked.
So shall we move on a little bit to kind of what happened a bit before this all happened and talk about AI a little bit? And Claire, I know you've been looking at this. I mean, this is the whole OpenAI Anthropic stuff that got announced just beforehand, right?
Yeah, so this was originally one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Andrew, is because of the work that he does with AI and with disruptive technologies, and watching last week some of the decision-making unfolding in the U.S. government about whether or not just whether Anthropic, which makes Claude AI, would be permissible to use by the U.S. government, but whether they would basically effectively ban it or make it so hard for them to work that they get pushed out of business. The surprise to me was that the decision they took happened on the day that they decided to start bombing Iran. Andrew, I don't know, we talked about this earlier. I don't know if you want to recap. So first of all, if you could explain what's happened, what it means from a government point of view, or what it actually means in practice, but also what the designation means as well. That might be a helpful place.
Sure. So the Pentagon, the Department of War and/or Department of Defense, has been in a months-long contract dispute with Anthropic, who makes the LLM model, the large language model, Claude, and this model has been growing. It's been backed by Amazon. It's very powerful, and it's been one of the main rivals commercially to OpenAI's model, ChatGPT, and of course there's others. But in this contract, but Anthropic has a sort of prominent role in the space to be a great advocate for regulation and safeguards within AI across all different spheres of AI regulation, whether it's what these LLMs can say and do, and how they are interacting with people every day in ways, we've seen these famous cases of suicide in the United States, or mass shooters who now consult with AI. I mean, Anthropic has a lot to say about that. They certainly care about job loss, and the CEO, Dario Amodei, has spoken a lot about where he thinks jobs are going and what should be done about that. So they really try to be a voice in the AI community that advocates for smart regulation, ethical development of AI. And part of that were contract terms that they had with the DoD to specifically stay away from mass surveillance, mass domestic surveillance, and AI autonomous weapon systems, and really specifically fully autonomous weapon systems. We can talk about the differentiation between that. But DoD didn't like that. They wanted to have a contract term. They wanted to change the existing contract that was awarded last summer. They wanted to change the contract to allow for the use by any legal means. This is the language they wanted to use, and nothing else. Now, the problem with that is the laws have not, and especially in the United States, have not caught up with sort of the technology itself. So any legal means sort of means no legal means, because there is no comprehensive AI regulatory bill here in the United States, certainly none that would cover what the DoD wants to use. And they reached an impasse last Friday, and Anthropic had been given a deadline before the contract would be canceled, and they would be considered by first the Department of Defense as a high-risk contractor and ultimately blacklisted. Not only could they never have a contract with the Department of Defense, no person who has a contract with the Department of Defense could use Claude as part of its systems, and that second tier has wide-reaching consequences. So then, after that, President Trump issued an executive order, and he said no agency throughout the system can use Claude, and they do have contracts across the U.S. government, because it's one of the only models that it is the only model, I think, of the big models that can use classified systems, namely the Amazon classified cloud, is what they were tapped into. So after that, and during this dispute, towards the tail end of it, Sam Altman and OpenAI started to try to move into the space, and they have now negotiated to fill this contract space that Anthropic had before, and now they've taken over this role, and they now have a deal with Amazon classified cloud, and they can operate in this space. So they've come in to fill that gap now.
I mean, it makes sense that the AI that sucks up to you the most is the AI that sucked up to the U.S. government the most.
Yes, I mean there is this. I mean, there is no love lost between Sam Altman and Dario Amodei. Dario started off with OpenAI and left them in 2021. There was famously, just I think last week, or was it the week before, a conference in India where everybody was making a lot of noise about how they would refuse to hold hands in the group picture at the summit, the India summit. Yeah. So this beef between the companies. Yeah, the beef between the companies is also between the individuals. But Sam Altman has said, and we must say that he was noted, I think it was in the New York Times today or yesterday, that he was able to achieve the safeguards that Anthropic wanted, namely that they would not be used for mass surveillance, and there would have to be some human oversight for AI weapon systems. So, a lot of this is about optics, is about vibes. Anthropic is seen as the woke LLM. And I'm not saying that, I think of all of the other AI models, Grok is certainly the far right favorite, but there's definitely a bit of that sort of inescapable politics behind this that may not speak to the substance of the issues. I mean, I can tell you, if you don't mind, I've worked a long time now trying to find ways to incorporate compliance with international humanitarian law in AI weapon systems. And I worked with NATO on this. I've worked with militaries in Latin America, and there was some progress on this. But then about 9 months ago, I saw I think it was incremental, but I started to see how countries thought that they are in this game theoretical trap, where if they even lose a single step of battlefield effectiveness because of their compliance and protection of civilians, they are going to be in big trouble. I mean, they see that they are in this all against all kind of race that speaks back to our last conversation about Iran, the changing in geopolitics, the changing global security landscape, and the development of these AI tools within warfare. If if these things slow them down a little bit, or give them any disadvantage, and when I speak to Ukrainians about this, and I do a lot, um, they say, well, why should we have to abide by this extra layers of compliance when Russia just will never do that, and we're in an existential fight for our lives, so we're not going to do that. I mean, I think that's the most stark reality. I mean, the truth is that they do have extra layers of compliance, um, but there is this big pushback against that because people think we're in this
So it's essentially
this
a
race.
prisoner's dilemma, right? It's a prisoner's dilemma.
It's exactly what it is.
Because I think as they were describing some of the restrictions that Anthropic wanted, one of the confusing things in my head was, well, this feels like or seems like things that are banned under U.S. law. Particularly if you are the recipient as a private company, if you are the recipient of U.S. Government money, and particularly what was called foreign assistance previously, but any federal funds, you were not allowed to use those funds to message or surveil Americans, and the steps you would have had to go to prove you weren't doing that were incredibly tight. I don't think that law's changed unless I've missed something dramatic in the last. It was perfectly possible in the last 6 months, but that hasn't changed.
You also
right?
have to go. No, that has not changed. And you also have to go through the Leahy vetting to show that you are not supporting human rights abusers in your contracting. And there are lots of layers of regulatory protection that have been passed, that have been in the past that stand today, just like the Geneva Conventions stand today to protect civilians in many, many contexts, and they are not changed, because of AI. There is absolutely a need for distinction between combatants and non-combatants, and proportionality. I mean, you cannot, disproportionately kill people without proving your strategic battlefield purpose. And there are other great principles of international humanitarian law that apply to AI weapon systems. It's just that we have sort of let that go. And in the domestic legal sense, there's just less prosecution for this. I mean, certainly under this administration, but we've seen that sort of degradation coming for a long time. I'll tell you, this is not going to change in the United States with a midterm election or a new president. This is not going to change. This is a steady step towards where we are that is much more complicated than an electoral cycle.
It feels like there's a bit of tension here between that libertarian side that wants tech to be free, effectively, but free to what end? And people who are both libertarian but big supporters of privacy. Like, how do you square that?
It's really funny that we seem to have lost that conversation that came right after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, which was this, very controversial means of surveilling the public, and all the debates over that. I think when I teach students who are undergraduate students and they're young, they seem to have accepted that, we definitely, as a generational thing, that we seem to have accepted that our data and our information is out there for the world, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, I personally kind of feel that way, and so I think, by and large, our society in the United States, at least, has let go of that idea. And when I teach on the GDPR, the EU's data protection laws, they're very foreign to my students here. The ability to be forgotten and the penalties that companies would have if they do not abide by this. And, I had a debate just last Thursday with a student who said, well, you consent to the form to give your data up. I mean, you accept the terms and conditions of whatever. You don't have to do that. And so, you give up your data, that's your fault. Too bad. And I think that interaction with social media and the digital space in general can be taken a step further to government surveilling and things like that. I think there's less of a concern of that today, broadly speaking.
I think people would be frightened if they saw what advertisers know about people. I mean, absolutely frightened. In the U.S., if you have a social security card and a driver's license, they basically know everything about you.
That jack is never going back in the box, though, is it? I mean, we're never going to get to the point, do you think, Andrew, where, yes, okay, the EU has the right to be forgotten stuff, but, that it's now a one-way system and our data has basically gone.
I believe so. I believe it's the case where, and I have a colleague in Cambridge, Johnny Penn, who writes about decomputerization, and he really believes that there will be a movement to all analog and just stepping away from this digital world. But besides those little pockets that I do think will probably emerge, we have accepted a life whereby our reliance upon systems that necessarily track us and use our data is so heavy that I don't think there's any way to put the genie back in the bottle, as you say, James.
It's absolutely fascinating, and thank you so much. And obviously, what is going on at the moment in Iran and in the Middle East is incredible. And just talking about normality, I wanted to ask you one final question, if that's all right, which is,
Sure.
we've seen in the last 72 hours or so the effects of what's happened. Obviously, terrible loss of life. We've seen travel chaos. The oil prices have shot up. All of this kind of stuff. This is the $1 million question, or multi-million-dollar question, I suppose. But can we expect a return to what, quote unquote, normality anytime soon? Do you think, or do you think this particular conflict is going to carry on for a long time?
It is a tough question. I mean, part of me thinks that this president doesn't have the attention span. He doesn't have the political capital here in the United States because this is not a popular intervention within the Republican or the Democratic Party. I don't think he has the tolerance within the markets, which very heavily influence him, as you say, the oil prices. So there are a lot of factors that would lend me to think that he would move towards the route of talking to the new leader and trying to figure something out, saying he killed the Ayatollah and calling it a win. And I think that may be something that could happen, especially with pressure from the Gulf states who have also no interest in this continuing, and they're very powerful and very influential. So that's one side. But the other side, we are in the middle of this. And if we see more American soldiers killed, we've already had 4. If we see, any civilians of to great extent killed by Iran in this continued back and forth, then of course you're going to just have a tit for tat of, again, just increasing feedback loop, negative feedback loop down a hole of violence that we can't escape from. Which would, I think, the next indicator, as we say in the security game, would see, look for if they do anything to intensify beyond just these airstrikes and put any kind of boots on the ground, and there's any kind of ground combat, then you're in for a big, a long-term, very long slog that would have horrible regional and potentially global, even further implications. I think that. Finally, I would just say that is the Trump side. I think Israel and the leadership in Israel, Netanyahu, I think they really want to do away with this regime, the Islamic Republic, once and for all. And so there's a lot of pressure on that side to continue this until it's done, which would be very, very difficult without a prolonged war.
Well, look, Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. Usually at this point, I like to remind the audience of what your title is and what you do, but it's going to take so long. I'm just going to say, Andrew Cheatham, the world's busiest man. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Claire, before we go, if you want to get in contact with the program, what's the email address?
It is hello@canwehaveYourAttention.com.
That's because we changed it, didn't we? We haven't mentioned it. Let's just do that again.
hello@canwehaveYourAttention.com.
Thank you very much for listening to the program today. We will be back within a fortnight with another episode, and do get in touch if you have anything you want to say about what you've heard on the program today.